Do you remember those clever cooking tricks only Betty Crocker knew? And we forgot? Back then, these kitchen hacks made daily meals easier and more special for families working hard every day. What else did we lose along the way that could still change how we cook today? Using gelatin to thicken sauces without lumps was a classic Betty Crocker trick that brought a silky smooth finish to gravies and desserts alike. Unlike modern methods that often rely on flour or cornstarch, this approach involved dissolving gelatin gently in a small amount of cold water before gradually adding it to warm sauces. This prevented any clumping, leaving behind a glossy texture that elevated even the simplest dishes. It was a reliable technique, especially during times when flour could be scarce or when cooks wanted a clear sauce rather than a cloudy one. Home cooks treasured this tip because it was easy, effective, and made their meals look as good as they tasted. Though it faded with time as convenience cooking took over, this gelatin method is still valuable today for those who want restaurant-quality results at home. Many forget that gelatin is a powerful thickening agent beyond desserts, and Betty Crocker was one of the first to bring this knowledge into the average kitchen. Reintroducing this trick could transform your sauces from ordinary to extraordinary, without the hassle of lumps or heavy flour flavors. Soaking celery in ice water to restore crispness was a simple but ingenious fridge hack that helped vintage kitchens keep their produce fresh and crunchy longer. Celery often loses its crunch quickly, especially when stored improperly or left out too long. Betty Crocker recommended soaking the celery stalks in a bowl of ice water for about an hour before use, which would revitalize wilted celery by rehydrating the cells and firming up the texture. This was an essential trick for home cooks who relied heavily on fresh vegetables in their salads and soups, but did not have access to refrigeration as efficient as today's models. The crisp celery made every meal feel fresher and more satisfying, preventing waste in households where every bit of food mattered. This quick refresh technique was widely taught in community cookbooks and cooking classes, but over time, people forgot the simple power of ice water for produce. Rediscovering this trick can save money and add that needed snap to your dishes. Making frosted glass jars to store leftovers was a clever way to keep food fresher longer using everyday kitchen supplies. Before airtight plastic containers became commonplace, Betty Crocker's guide suggested frosting glass jars with a layer of wax paper or parchment on the inside to create a moisture barrier. This helped prevent leftover foods from drying out or absorbing unwanted odors in the fridge. The slightly frosted surface also reduced condensation buildup, which was a major cause of early spoilage in cold storage. This method was especially popular during wartime rationing and the Depression, when stretching meals and saving leftovers was critical. Housewives took pride in preserving food quality as long as possible, and this little trick gave their meals a second life without needing special containers. Today, with plastic everywhere, this elegant and eco-friendly solution is often overlooked. Bringing it back not only saves money but also adds a nostalgic charm to food storage. How to soften brown sugar with a slice of bread was an old but incredibly effective method to fix hardened sugar that saved countless cooks from frustration. Brown sugar, with its natural molasses content, tends to dry out and form solid lumps when left exposed to air. Betty Crocker recommended placing a slice of fresh bread in the container with the sugar and sealing it tight for a day or two. The moisture from the bread would transfer to the sugar, restoring its soft, crumbly texture without damaging flavor. This simple kitchen hack meant no waste and no need to buy new sugar, which was particularly important during rationing periods. It was a household secret passed down through generations and featured in many mid-century cookbooks. Today, people might reach for microwaves or commercial softening products, but the bread trick remains an all-natural, cost-free solution that really works. It also teaches patience and resourcefulness in the kitchen. Using mayonnaise in cakes for moisture without butter was a surprising ingredient swap that kept cakes tender in ration or budget-conscious homes. During times when butter was expensive or scarce, Betty Crocker revealed that mayonnaise could replace butter or oil to maintain moistness and richness in baked goods. Since mayonnaise is mostly oil and eggs, it adds moisture and binding qualities that keep cakes soft without altering the flavor. This trick was a game changer for families struggling with limited ingredients but still wanting homemade treats. It was widely accepted because it used what was often on hand in the pantry, reducing waste and expense. The secret to success was not to overdo it, but to substitute carefully, following trusted recipes. Modern bakers who rediscover this hack can enjoy lighter, moist cakes without the saturated fat of butter. This forgotten method reminds us that everyday ingredients can have multiple clever uses. Reviving stale bread with a damp towel and oven heat was a clever way to avoid waste and enjoy fresh-tasting bread longer. Rather than tossing hard or dried-out loaves, Betty Crocker recommended wrapping the bread in a slightly damp kitchen towel and placing it in a warm oven for a few minutes. The steam created would soften the crust and refresh the crumb, making the bread enjoyable again for sandwiches or toast. This simple technique was essential when bread was a precious commodity, especially during rationing and economic hardship. It gave home cooks a second chance to use leftovers without sacrificing quality or taste. The trick was easy enough for beginners and made a big difference in reducing food waste. Today, many forget this old-school method, relying on buying fresh bread instead. Bringing it back not only saves money, but also reconnects us with a time when nothing edible was wasted. Wrapping butter in wax paper for easier spreading was a practical tip that made cold butter easier to work with before the age of microwaves. Betty Crocker taught that wrapping sticks or blocks of butter tightly in wax paper and storing them in the fridge made the butter softer and easier to slice or spread directly on bread. The wax paper prevented the butter from absorbing unwanted fridge smells and also made it easy to unwrap small amounts without messy fingers. This was an important daily convenience for home cooks, especially when refrigeration was colder and butter was firmer than today. The tip helped keep butter fresh and ready for use while avoiding waste or spoilage. In modern kitchens, butter is often softened on the counter or melted, but this classic wrapping method remains an elegant solution for maintaining butter's best texture and flavor. Using toothpicks to test cake doneness without drying was a delicate method to check baking progress without damaging texture. Instead of inserting a knife or fork that might remove too much batter or leave large holes, Betty Crocker's recipes often suggested using a clean toothpick to poke the cake lightly. If it came out clean or with a few moist crumbs, the cake was done. If batter stuck to it, more time was needed. This simple tool avoided disturbing the cake's surface and ensured even cooking. It was a practical hack that home bakers swore by to avoid underbaked or overbaked results. Though easy, this test required gentle hands and attention to detail, embodying the care classic cooking demanded. Modern bakers still use toothpicks, but many forget its original intent as a precision instrument rather than a quick poke. Making fluffy mashed potatoes by adding hot milk gradually was a classic technique to avoid gluey or heavy mashed potatoes. Betty Crocker emphasized warming the milk before mixing it slowly into cooked potatoes, which helped the starches absorb liquid evenly and created a smooth, light texture. Cold milk shocked the potatoes and caused them to seize up, resulting in a dense and sticky mash. This technique was especially important when potatoes were a staple food and needed to be prepared just right to satisfy hungry families. The gradual addition allowed for better control over consistency and avoided watery or overly stiff results. While simple, it was a mark of good home cooking skill in mid-century kitchens. Rediscovering this trick can turn ordinary mashed potatoes into a creamy delight worthy of any dinner table. Using a cheese grater to shred cold butter for pastry dough was an old-fashioned hack for quick, flaky pie crusts. Instead of softening butter until spreadable, Betty Crocker advised grating cold butter directly into the flour, creating small, evenly distributed pieces that helped produce a tender and crumbly texture. This saved time and avoided melting the butter too much, which could ruin the delicate layers of pastry. It was especially useful in an era before stand mixers or food processors, giving home cooks an easy way to achieve professional results by hand. The grated butter mixed easily with flour, trapping air and moisture during baking to create flakiness. Though less common today with modern equipment, this technique remains a charming and effective method for those who prefer hands-on baking. It embodies the practical ingenuity Betty Crocker was famous for teaching. Preserving herbs in oil for longer freshness was a smart pantry trick, cherished in vintage kitchens to keep garden herbs usable well beyond their natural shelf life. Instead of letting herbs wilt or dry out quickly, Home cooks would finely chop fresh herbs like parsley, thyme, or rosemary and pack them tightly into clean glass jars. Then they would cover the herbs completely with olive oil or vegetable oil, sealing the jar tightly to prevent air exposure. This method created a flavorful, herb-infused oil that could be used in cooking or as a finishing touch for dishes. Not only did this technique extend the herbs' usability through winter months, but it also captured their fresh flavors in a convenient form. This old-fashioned preservation trick was especially valuable before modern freezing and refrigeration methods were widespread. It allowed families to enjoy the taste of summer herbs year-round without the cost or waste of constantly buying fresh produce. Rediscovering this method today offers a delicious way to add fresh herb flavor to everyday meals with a touch of nostalgic practicality. Using potato water to thicken soups and stews naturally was a clever and economical way to avoid flour or cornstarch as thickening agents. When boiling potatoes, the starchy water left behind was often saved and added to soups or stews to create a velvety texture without needing extra ingredients. Betty Crocker's recipes encouraged this practice as a resourceful method during times when pantry staples were limited or expensive. The potato water provided a subtle richness and body, enhancing the mouthfeel of broths and reducing waste in the kitchen. This trick was especially important during the Depression and wartime rationing, when stretching ingredients was essential. It also allowed cooks to keep recipes simple and gluten-free before dietary restrictions became widely known. The use of potato water as a thickener brought a natural creaminess to dishes, transforming humble soups into hearty meals. Today, many have forgotten this straightforward technique, but it remains a valuable, zero-cost way to improve soups and stews with minimal effort. Canning leftover fruit juices into jellies without pectin was a homemade preservation trick popular before commercial pectins were widely available. Home cooks would collect juices from cooked fruits like apples, berries, or grapes and boil them with sugar until the mixture naturally thickened and set into jelly form. This process relied on the natural pectin content of the fruit or slow reduction to achieve the right consistency. Betty Crocker encouraged such resourceful methods to reduce waste and extend the use of precious fruit harvests, especially during the Depression and wartime. Families could preserve seasonal flavors in jars, creating sweet spreads that lasted months without refrigeration. This hands-on method required patience and careful temperature control, making it a prized skill among home canners. Though commercial pectins simplified jelly making later on, the traditional technique held a charm and authenticity that many modern cooks now seek to revive. It represents a time when food preservation was as much art as science. Creating mock mayonnaise with egg yolk and vinegar was a wartime-era hack that helped households cope when commercial mayonnaise was scarce or rationed. This clever substitute involved whisking egg yolks with vinegar, oil, and seasonings to mimic the creamy texture and tang of real mayonnaise. Betty Crocker's cookbooks offered this recipe as an affordable and easy alternative that required only basic pantry ingredients. The mock mayo kept salads, sandwiches, and dressings flavorful during tough economic times and supply shortages. It was particularly useful when fresh eggs and vinegar were more available than processed condiments. This homemade version might not have had the exact consistency of store-bought mayo, but it delivered the essential taste and moisture needed in classic recipes. Today, recreating this old-fashioned substitute can connect modern cooks to a resourceful culinary tradition that made simple ingredients stretch farther while keeping meals delicious and familiar. Using wax paper instead of plastic wrap for baking preparation was a versatile and multi-use trick taught by Betty Crocker for layering, wrapping, and preventing sticking in the kitchen. Before plastic wrap became common, cooks used wax paper to separate dough layers, line pans, and cover foods during preparation. Its non-stick surface made it ideal for rolling out pastry or chocolate-covered treats without mess. Wax paper also helped preserve freshness when wrapping baked goods or sandwiches. This practical substitution reflected a time when synthetic plastics were not yet widely accessible or affordable. Its ability to keep ingredients separated and clean while allowing some breathability was invaluable in managing kitchen workflows. Though modern cooks often default to plastic wrap, revisiting wax paper offers a sustainable and effective alternative that echoes classic cooking methods, It also provides a tactile and nostalgic connection to mid-century kitchens where resourcefulness was key. Stretching meat with bread or cereal and meatloaf was a frugal mid-century tip that helped bulk up protein dishes affordably without sacrificing flavor or texture. Betty Crocker's recipes frequently included soaking breadcrumbs or crushed cereal in milk or water before mixing them into ground meat. This not only increased the volume of the loaf but also added moisture and tenderness, making the meatloaf go further on a tight budget. The technique was especially popular during the Depression and wartime rationing when meat was expensive and limited. Using pantry staples to extend precious protein allowed families to feed more mouths with less meat, reducing waste while maintaining satisfying meals. This clever hack became a foundation of home cooking for generations and is still taught in some classic recipe collections. Understanding this method reminds modern cooks that frugality and flavor can coexist and that simple ingredients can elevate economical dishes. Freezing leftover milk in ice cube trays for coffee or baking was a neat storage trick rarely seen today but cherished in vintage kitchens. Rather than wasting unused milk or cream, home cooks poured the extra liquid into ice cube trays and froze it into convenient single-use portions. These cubes could then be popped directly into coffee, hot chocolate, or recipes calling for small amounts of milk without the need to thaw a whole container. Betty Crocker's advice encouraged this practice as a way to reduce spoilage and stretch dairy products, which were often rationed or costly. The trick saved money and prevented the hassle of discarding spoiled milk. Although contemporary refrigeration and packaging make this less common, freezing milk in cubes remains a smart solution for anyone looking to cut waste and have precise portions ready at a moment's notice. It is a testament to simple but effective kitchen resourcefulness. Using a cold water soak to reduce salt in cured meats was an old trick to rescue too salty leftovers and make them more enjoyable. If bacon, ham, or salted pork had been over-cured or stored too long, home cooks would soak the slices in cold water for several hours or overnight. This process helped draw out excess salt, mellowing the flavor without sacrificing the meat's texture or usefulness. Betty Crocker's guides promoted this method as a cost-saving measure that allowed families to stretch their food supply and avoid waste. It was especially helpful in eras when purchasing fresh meat was a challenge or expensive. This soaking trick balanced strong saltiness while maintaining the rich flavor characteristic of cured meats. Today, many have forgotten this straightforward fix, but it remains a practical solution for those dealing with saltier than desired products. Making flavored butter by mixing in kitchen herbs and spices was a quick upgrade for everyday meals in classic home cooking. Betty Crocker encouraged adding finely chopped herbs like parsley, chives, or dill, along with spices such as garlic or paprika, directly into softened butter. This infused the butter with fresh, vibrant tastes that could enhance bread, vegetables, or meats without needing elaborate sauces. It was an easy way to elevate simple meals, especially when fresh herbs were abundant in victory gardens or on windowsills. This homemade flavored butter became a signature of mid-century kitchens where cooks sought to make ordinary foods feel special with minimal effort. The practice also helped reduce reliance on costly or time-consuming condiments by using what was on hand. Today, flavored butters are seen as gourmet treats, but their roots lie in the practical and inventive cooking habits taught by Betty Crocker. Using crushed crackers as a versatile binder and topping was a handy pantry staple for casseroles and coatings taught in many mid-century cookbooks. Instead of breadcrumbs, home cooks often crushed saltine or soda crackers to bind meat mixtures or sprinkle over casseroles for a golden crust. This trick gave dishes a satisfying texture and flavor while making use of readily available ingredients. Betty Crocker's recipes highlighted this approach as an economical and reliable way to improve both presentation and taste. Crackers added a subtle saltiness and crunch that transformed simple meals into crowd pleasers without extra cost. This technique was common in homes across the country, especially during rationing or times when fresh bread was scarce. Though less common today, using crushed crackers remains a timeless kitchen hack that enhances both binding and crisp topping in comfort foods. Keeping brown sugar soft with a terracotta disc was a clever and reusable kitchen tool from the mid-century era that many homemakers relied on to prevent hardened sugar lumps. The small terracotta piece, often shaped like a flat disc or charm, was soaked briefly in water and then placed inside the container with brown sugar. The porous material slowly released moisture, keeping the sugar soft and easy to scoop without affecting the flavor. This simple trick saved time and frustration for home cooks who otherwise had to break up clumps or replace hardened sugar. It was especially handy during times when wasting any ingredient was out of the question. The terracotta disc became a beloved kitchen companion, often passed down through generations. Though rarely used today, rediscovering this method can help reduce waste and save money while adding a touch of vintage charm to your pantry. Separating eggs with a plastic bottle instead of a yolk separator was a simple household hack popularized in vintage homemaking books as a neat alternative to specialized kitchen tools. The technique involved squeezing an empty plastic bottle slightly, positioning the opening over the cracked egg yolk, and releasing the squeeze to suction up the yolk cleanly. This method allowed cooks to separate yolks from whites quickly and with minimal mess using common items they already had at home. It was especially useful in busy kitchens where gadgets were limited or costly. The plastic bottle trick reduced the risk of breaking yolks and saved time during baking or cooking preparations. Even as egg separators became more common, this hack remained a reliable backup for many households. It is a perfect example of resourcefulness from an era when improvisation was key to efficient cooking. Using cold water to rinse cooked pasta to stop cooking was a mid-century tip that helped home cooks achieve better texture in pasta salads and other chilled dishes. After boiling pasta to the desired doneness, Betty Crocker and other classic cookbooks recommended draining it and rinsing immediately under cold running water. This step quickly halted the cooking process, preventing the noodles from becoming mushy or overcooked. It also removed excess starch, which could cause pasta to stick together when cooled. The result was firm, separate strands ideal for cold salads or chilled dishes served at picnics and potlucks. This simple technique was especially important before modern quick-cook pastas and refrigeration advances. It helped ensure consistent quality and presentation. Although often skipped today, revisiting this cold rinse step can significantly improve pasta dishes served cold or at room temperature. Reviving wilted lettuce with a saltwater soak was an economical freshness hack used before the convenience of plastic packaging extended produced shelf life. When lettuce or leafy greens became limp or slightly wilted, home cooks would immerse the leaves in a bowl of cold salted water for several minutes. The salt helped draw moisture into the leaves, restoring crispness and firmness. This trick was widely taught in vintage cookbooks and household guides, helping families stretch the life of their fresh vegetables and reduce waste. The simple soak not only perked up salads, but also improved the texture and taste of cooked greens. It was a practical solution when fresh produce was more precious and less readily available than today. Rediscovering this soak method offers a natural and budget-friendly way to make greens more appealing and last longer. Pre-soaking beans overnight to cut cooking time dramatically was a fundamental but sometimes forgotten step in classic cooking that saved both fuel and time. Before quick cook and canned beans became common, home cooks followed Betty Crocker's advice to soak dried beans in cold water for at least 8 hours or overnight. This softening process helped break down the tough outer skins of the beans, allowing them to cook evenly and more quickly the next day. It also improved digestibility by reducing complex sugars that often cause gas and bloating. Soaking not only shortened cooking times, but also ensured better texture and flavor, resulting in tender beans with a creamy interior. This simple yet vital step was especially important during the mid-century, when fuel was costly and cooking resources were limited, making every minute and calorie count. Although modern conveniences like canned beans and pressure cookers have made this step less necessary, revisiting the practice of pre-soaking beans can greatly improve the quality of homemade bean dishes. It is a tribute to traditional culinary wisdom that emphasizes patience and resourcefulness to create the best possible meals with limited resources. Storing onions wrapped in newspaper to extend shelf life was a practical pantry trick widely used before the advent of modern refrigeration. Home cooks would wrap individual onions or whole bunches in sheets of newspaper and store them in a cool, dry, and dark place such as a cellar, pantry, or basement. The newspaper absorbed excess moisture and helped protect the onions from light exposure, which could cause premature sprouting or spoilage. This simple technique helped maintain onion firmness and flavor for several weeks or even months, making it an essential preservation method during times of rationing and economic hardship. Betty Crocker cookbooks and household guides recommended this inexpensive and easy method to reduce food waste and stretch precious supplies. The practice was especially important when refrigeration was not widespread, and families had to rely on natural storage methods to keep vegetables fresh. Although less common today due to modern refrigerators and mesh bags, wrapping onions in newspaper remains an effective, eco-friendly storage tip. It also connects us to vintage kitchen habits and reminds us of the resourcefulness required in classic home cooking. Making pantry pickles using vinegar and household spices was an accessible way to add crunch and flavor in wartime kitchens where fresh produce was limited. Instead of relying on store-bought pickles, Betty Crocker's recipes guided home cooks to quickly pickle available vegetables like cucumbers, green beans, or onions, using simple brines made from vinegar, water, salt, and common spices such as mustard seeds, dill, or peppercorns. These quick pickles preserved vegetables, extended their usability, and provided much-needed variety and tang to otherwise simple meals. The technique required minimal equipment and no refrigeration, making it perfect for rationed households or those gardening their own vegetables. Pantry pickling was both a flavor enhancer and a survival tactic, keeping nutrition and zest in wartime diets. This timeless method remains a great way to preserve and enjoy seasonal produce at home. Using stale cake or bread to make bread pudding or trifles was a resourceful way to reduce waste while creating tasty, comforting desserts in mid-century kitchens. When cakes or bread went stale or dry, rather than throwing them away, home cooks would repurpose them by layering or soaking in custard mixtures to transform them into soft, flavorful puddings or layered trifles with fruit and cream. Betty Crocker popularized these recipes as economical treats that made the most of leftovers while providing families with sweet endings to meals. The slow baking or chilling processes revived the texture and added moisture, turning seemingly unusable leftovers into crowd pleasers. This thrifty trick was especially important during rationing and economic downturns when nothing edible was wasted. These desserts also allowed home cooks to add variety and indulgence to their meals without extra cost, making them beloved staples in family traditions. Today, making bread pudding or trifles from stale baked goods remains a delicious nod to classic frugality and creativity in the kitchen. Making egg salad creamier by adding a spoonful of sour cream was a mid-century twist on the classic recipe that gave it a richer, tangier texture. Instead of using mayonnaise alone, Betty Crocker recommended folding in sour cream or cottage cheese to lighten the salad and add moisture without overwhelming fat. This adjustment enhanced flavor complexity while keeping the dish fresh and cool, making it a favorite for sandwiches and picnic spreads. The addition of sour cream also helped stretch the amount of mayonnaise needed, a useful tip during times when some ingredients were rationed or expensive. This creamy upgrade brought a new dimension to a familiar comfort food, blending tradition with practicality. The subtle tang of sour cream balanced the richness, making the egg salad more refreshing and palatable on warm days. Although less common today, this classic combination remains a simple way to improve egg salad's texture and taste while recalling vintage culinary charm. Layering Jell-O with fruit and whipped topping for festive desserts was a clever presentation trick common in classic American gatherings and holiday meals. Betty Crocker's recipes often featured bright, colorful Jell-O molded in layers, alternating with fresh or canned fruits and topped with fluffy whipped cream or marshmallows. This visually appealing dessert was both economical and fun, easily made with affordable ingredients that stretched to feed many. The layering technique created a festive light dessert that balanced sweetness and texture, delighting children and adults alike. It was a staple at potlucks, picnics, and family dinners during the mid-century, symbolizing celebration and togetherness. People would often customize the layers with seasonal fruits or add nuts and coconut flakes for extra flavor and crunch. Its eye-catching appearance made it a centerpiece on dessert tables, encouraging conversation and smiles around the gathering. While modern dessert trends have shifted, this nostalgic treat reminds us of simpler times when creativity and presentation was as important as flavor. Drying your meat and fish in the wind has also been a pretty cultural practice of people who live lives dependent on hunting, gathering, and community-based living. Drying in the wind actually works better because the wind accelerates the evaporation process by getting rid of the moisture that your protein, fish, red meat, or chicken releases on its own. You want to keep it like this because the moving air makes the moisture go away as soon as it releases, making sure it stays chronically dehydrated. Fish, especially the ones that were caught in coastal cities and regions, also used to be gutted and split open and then hung out to dry. This would help the brine enhance the flavor and also make the fish overall easier to carry and transport. Besides that, there were lots of issues with this though. It was really only ideal in warm or moist climates. In cold ones, the humidity had to be low and the air had to be pretty crisp. Also, you had to keep moving and turning the fish or meat so that it would dry evenly and that the moisture was even going away. If you didn't do this, you risked spoiling it yourself. I think there are better ways of drying, but this wasn't a trick that would apply to people like you or me anyway. Besides the obvious reason for recycling and reusing things to avoid any unnecessary spending, these tins were also significantly durable and lasted a long time. They were usually always the perfect size as well, and it was as if they were meant to be a permanent home for sewing supplies. Spools of thread, thimbles, needles, and sharp objects all would hold in one box while being very easy to grab when you needed it. Once you were done, you could just put everything back. So, you're all no stranger to the concept of heat being really good at sterilizing things. That goes for pretty much every kind of food you've ever had, but it also goes for your bottles too. Why? Well, heat actually kills a lot more things than you might know. It kills pretty much any kind of bacteria, virus, and fungi. And while I'm not trying to imply you wouldn't know that, what I do think is that people, myself included, aren't aware of just how many bacteria there are on surfaces around us. Actually, the number is staggering. They all die of around 212 degrees Fahrenheit though, and that's the temperature of boiling water. This helps to completely obliterate most of these organisms on a cellular level, which is pretty metal if you ask me. The high temperature literally breaks them down into nothing, and they either become inactive because structurally they either just can't work anymore or they are outright killed. Pretty neat, right? Not only do you end up getting your water bottles sterilized, but they end up becoming as clean as they can be too. Clay pot slow cooking was not just a recipe. It was a way of pulling flavor out of the earth itself. Native American communities would form thick-walled pots from river clay, baking them slowly in open fires until they were strong enough to hold the richest stews and slow-roasted meats you can imagine. The secret was patience. Cooking meat in these pots over smoldering coals allowed the juices to stay trapped inside, cycling through the dish again and again, infusing every bite with pure, concentrated flavor. No fancy Dutch oven, no stainless steel miracle cookware. Just ancient craftsmanship and a bond with nature so strong you could taste it. The slow, even heat of a clay pot gave even the toughest cuts of meat a tenderness you would not believe unless you had tried it. In a world before timers and thermostats, this was real mastery. And the taste? It was as close to magic as food can get. But clay was not the only tool they used to summon incredible flavors. Sometimes, the real secret was hidden in something even lighter than air, something that grew tall all around them: corn husks. Cactus as a natural tenderizer sounds almost too strange to believe, but it was an everyday trick in many native kitchens. Certain varieties, like prickly pear, are packed with natural enzymes that break down tough muscle fibers in meat. By rubbing raw cactus slices over a piece of game meat, or even marinating it in cactus juice, they could turn chewy, sinewy cuts into tender, flavorful meals that needed almost no extra cooking. It was pure kitchen magic, pulled straight from the harshest landscapes. In places where hunting was hard and every scrap of meat mattered, this trick was not just clever, it was survival. No waste, no frustration, Just another example of how nature handed over its secrets to those who knew how to listen. The best part is that Cactus does not mask the flavor of the meat. It simply softens it, letting the real richness shine through. Even today, modern chefs have started waking up to this forgotten genius. But it was not just fresh meals that mattered. When you needed to carry food across miles of wilderness, you needed another skill altogether: the incredible art of sun-drying meats under the open sky. The secret of grease preserves is one of those survival tricks that almost defies belief today. After cooking meat, Native American chefs would save every drop of rendered animal fat, pouring it carefully over shredded or chopped pieces of the meat inside clay pots or animal bladders. Once sealed, the fat hardened into a protective barrier that kept bacteria and air out, preserving the meat for weeks, even months. This was not just storage. It was insurance against famine, sickness, and scarcity. Meat preserved this way stayed rich, flavorful, and nutritious, providing vital energy when fresh food was impossible to find. Every time someone dipped into a pot of grease preserves, they were eating a lesson in patience, gratitude, and survival. But even the best preserved meat needed help lasting through long journeys or seasons, and sometimes the land itself offered the perfect cold pantry, hidden just beneath your feet. Cloth bags can actually help your cheese age just right, and I bet that sounds like a really weird mix to you, but it's as legitimate as a mix can be. The right conditions for aging all happen inside the wonderful confines of a cloth bag, so you have that for one. Basically, to age cheese and to age it properly, you need three different things. You need moisture that's regulated, and you need a lot of air circulation. None of that means anything if your environment isn't clean, so you need to be able to prevent contamination as well as you can. Moisture regulation is really important because as it keeps aging, then cheese starts losing moisture. Cloth bags, on the other hand, are made of really breathable material and help moisture to evaporate a bit more slowly so that the cheese doesn't get too dry. Cheese aging also helps keep air balanced since the cloth bag is really porous. All those tiny little openings help air to flow around the cheese, which you really need for the health of the rind. It helps for those helpful little bacteria and molds that you find on cheese to grow. Some of those microorganisms don't deserve to die in a heat death. They make your burger a lot better. Third of all, the bag itself just works as a natural barrier against any kind of dirty substance, insect, or material. All in all, you get a perfect vibe for your cheese. Butter dishes with lids were something that you would find in almost every household. Just like you would walk in most homes today and expect to find a coffee maker or a deep fryer, back then, in the age of our grandparents, butter dishes were very popular ways of storing the spread. You would keep them at room temperature instead of in the fridge, so they were always soft and spreadable, and you would protect them from any dirt. These existed even before the time of accessible and affordable refrigeration, and they were made from glass or ceramic. Usually they would be pretty fashionable too, with lots of unique designs and ornate detail put into them. Speaking of fridges, how did people preserve things before they came around? Because keeping everything in a prison of ice was not ideal either. If you would bury root vegetables in the crown, then you were literally taking advantage of the natural regulation of the earth. This was a common practice that people did to keep vegetables as fresh as they could be and extend their shelf life. And it was something you'd see a lot throughout the winter. Basically, in the colder months, since the ground tends to maintain a consistently cool temperature, it helps slow the metabolic process of most vegetables down. This helps to stave off the decaying process, but the temperature of the soil during the winter is actually a lot lower than you think. It's literally just a few degrees Fahrenheit above the freezing point, and this way, not only do you get to preserve your fruit, but the overall nutritional content and texture get preserved too. Most vegetables also really need to be hydrated properly, or they'll shrivel up and die, and soil acts as a natural wellspring of moisture, so you get that covered easily. So, you really want that aesthetically perfect slice of cake, right? The one that looks like it's right out of a TV ad, the one that just looks wonderfully symmetrical and like it was cut by a pro? You can't get that with a knife, despite what the TV shows. We've all been there, friend. I'll let you in on a little secret too. They probably don't use knives either. When you start with a knife, Especially if the blade is dull or blunt, then the pressure that the knife gives off might cause some pretty uneven compression throughout the cake. This can happen because of the knife or just you using too much force, but whatever the cause, you get uneven slices as a result. However, you don't get this problem with a string line. Know why? String lines create uniform pressure across the entire surface of the cake. You can pull the cake through the cake without much force either, unlike a knife, where you'd kind of have to try to push down. These two factors make string lines almost irreplaceable when it comes to slicing cake, because it means you get the most even slice with the least amount of force. Also, have you ever noticed the way cake sticks to knives? Strings don't really have that problem because of their thinness. Knives, on the other hand, are prone to dragging a lot of the cake with them. How native chefs made instant trail mix with dried berries and nuts is a perfect example of simple genius meeting real-world survival. Long before colorful packages lined grocery store shelves, Native American communities were gathering handfuls of nature's purest energy foods, drying them carefully under the sun, and combining them into powerful portable meals. Wild berries like chokecherry, elderberry, and wild strawberries were prized for their tartness and nutrition, while nuts like acorns, walnuts, and pine nuts packed a heavy punch of fat and protein. Some tribes even added roasted seeds, puffed grains, or strips of dried meat for extra stamina. The goal was not just taste, but endurance. It was survival in your pocket, designed by thousands of years of knowledge. And while they packed sweetness and strength into every bite, when it came to seasoning savory meals, native chefs turned to another source altogether: wild plants that turned every piece of meat into pure wilderness flavor. Rock boiling is one of those lost arts that feels almost too wild to be real, but it absolutely was, and it still works today if you know how to do it. Picture this: you have no metal pot, no pan, nothing but a fire, a handful of food, and a riverbank full of stones. Native American cooks would heat large, clean rocks directly in the fire until they were almost glowing, then carefully drop them into hollowed-out bowls made of bark, animal hide, or clay. The heat from the stones would bring the water to a bubbling boil almost instantly, allowing them to cook stews, boil roots, or even prepare medicinal teas without ever burning the vessel. It was a skill that could mean the difference between an empty belly and a full one. And it was not just functional. It gave the food a subtle mineral richness you cannot replicate any other way. Today, rock boiling feels almost mythical, a forgotten page from a cookbook written by the earth itself. And speaking of earth, some of the most astonishing bread you have never tasted was baked without an oven, without a pan, and sometimes without anything more than a pile of hot ashes. Now, cheese aging more or less has the same deal. Maturing cheese over time to give each wheel its own unique flavor, personality, and profile is an Italian hobby that probably predates the country's own existence, but in America it was brought on over during the 20th century. The science behind cheese aging basically has a lot to do with breaking down the fat of your regular unchecked milk fats into free fatty acids, which for our purposes, let's just say they have a lot more taste and flavor. Now, the other process is proteolysis, and during the entire cheese aging, enzymes that were taken from the milk and the bacterial cultures used to make the cheese help to break down the proteins that are there. It does the same thing as before, and the longer this goes on, the stronger those flavors become. That's why they really let those things sit for years, because it's basically a game of patience. The one who waits the longest gets the best cheese. Have you ever heard of turning a milk jar into a butter maker? I bet you haven't, because if I'm being totally honest with you, I didn't know either. Yet the process of churning really helps to keep the cream from separating from the fat that you find in the buttermilk. The milk jar, since it's a glass container with an airtight seal, can even help to churn the butter. I'll tell you why. Butter is made when you basically irritate heavy cream and violently shake it until the point that the cream starts to mix together and stick. Then, you take the liquid and separate it, and that is how you get buttermilk. Milk jars end up being the ideal choice for this because they can hold cream really well and also handle the amount of violent churning and shaking you need to really create the butter. The churning is what causes the cream to start turning into butter, and the tight seal really helps you keep the moisture you need to retain the texture. Roasting root vegetables directly in campfire coals was one of the simplest yet most powerful cooking methods passed down through generations. Without ovens, pots, or fancy tools, native cooks understood that the earth's hidden foods, things like carrots, turnips, onions, and yams, could be transformed into sweet, hearty meals with nothing more than time and fire. Raw roots were buried in the hot, glowing coals of a dying fire, slowly roasting under layers of ash and heat. As they baked, their natural sugars caramelized, their fibers softened, and what once was hard and bitter became soft, rich, and deeply satisfying. Pulling a roasted root from the coals was like uncovering buried treasure, the skin blackened and crisp, the inside steaming and tender. And speaking of patience, some of the sweetest flavors ever created by native chefs required even longer waits, like gathering and boiling maple sap into a clear, nourishing water that tasted like spring itself. The secret of grease preserves is one of those survival tricks that almost defies belief today. After cooking meat, Native American chefs would save every drop of rendered animal fat, pouring it carefully over shredded or chopped pieces of the meat inside clay pots or animal bladders. Once sealed, the fat hardened into a protective barrier that kept bacteria and air out, preserving the meat for weeks, even months. This was not just storage. It was insurance against famine, sickness, and scarcity. Meat preserved this way stayed rich, flavorful, and nutritious, providing vital energy when fresh food was impossible to find. Every time someone dipped into a pot of grease preserves, they were eating a lesson in patience, gratitude, and survival. But even the best preserved meat needed help lasting through long journeys or seasons, and sometimes the land itself offered the perfect cold pantry, hidden just beneath your feet. Rennet preservation, on the other hand, is a whole different animal. Rennet is an enzyme that's traditionally made from ruminant animals like cows, goats, and sheep. It helps to make cheese because it coagulates milk and causes the proteins in it to curdle and separate. This transformation is pretty much the sole reason why fresh milk even becomes cheese, and I'm going to explain to you how all this works. So, when you mix rennet with milk, it has the enzyme renin in it. This specifically hits the primary protein in milk, which is casein. Imagine if somebody basically made really specific cuts in your limbs, causing the rest of your body to clump together. Maybe not the most descriptive example, but that's pretty much what happens. What you get left with is whey, and that's drained off. The leftover curds are then processed into different types of cheese. See, people didn't do this because they really loved cheese, though. They did it because it was the ideal way to use your milk. Milk would spoil incredibly fast, and for people who were either living a very day-to-day life, taking it as it comes, that just wasn't fitting in with their routines or priorities. Potatoes are really starchy, and this gives them a lot of benefits outside the kitchen and your plate of food too. It helps them take away any kind of excess salt from your dish by just making sure that you don't have excessive moisture. As we have gone through so many times in this video already, the moisture amount in your food needs to be just right for a lot of things to work, as they ideally should. Potatoes, being composed almost entirely of starch, have a massive capacity for absorbing all kinds of liquids. You put raw potatoes into some kind of soup, stew, or sauce, and just watch as it takes away the liquid and salt. Most of the salty liquid gets absorbed by the potatoes thanks to a process known as osmosis. This is what happens when liquids or water move from one object to another to balance out the overall concentrations. The starches of the potato help to make a membrane that helps to draw the liquid into the potato. Plus, besides just that, potatoes are really good at diluting salt. Why does this help? It helps to keep the salt-to-food ratio low, which ensures that your steak or burger is just the right amount of bitter and not overpoweringly so. All in all, a little potatoes on the side have more benefits than you'd initially expect. The trick of smoking corn husks for deep, sweet flavor might sound simple today, but it was revolutionary in the world of ancient cooking. Corn was life to many native communities, not just a crop, but a living gift. Every part of it was precious, especially the husks. By soaking them lightly and laying them over hot coals or wrapping food inside them, Cooks could infuse whatever they were making with a smoky, sweet richness that no wood or spice could ever truly replace. Smoking corn husks became a way to turn plain dishes into something sacred, layering that faint sweetness into meats, vegetables, even simple bread. It was an invisible ingredient, a secret handshake between the land and the plate. Today, a few high-end restaurants still use this trick, usually without telling you, because the result feels so natural, so impossibly rich, that diners are left wondering what kind of sorcery they have just eaten. But corn was not the only plant they turned to for hidden flavor and power. If you knew where to look, even the tallest pine trees offered a secret recipe for survival. Deer fat candles were one of the most imaginative and resourceful ways Native American cooks kept their meats tender and richly flavored over long, slow roasts. After rendering down the fat from deer or elk, they would form simple candles, which were set up to drip slowly over roasting meat on open spits or stone racks. As the fat melted, it would baste the meat continuously, keeping it moist, savory, and infused with a deep, wild flavor that no bottled sauce or glaze could ever match. This technique did not just make the food taste better, it helped preserve it longer, coating the meat with protective fat layers that held in moisture and kept bacteria at bay. But when it came to baking bread, Native cooks had another kind of magic altogether, capturing the very air itself to make dough rise without a single packet of yeast. So wax paper really helps keep ice cream soft because it helps stop those nasty little ice crystals from forming thanks to cutting off its exposure to air. Ice cream tends to get, well, icy or hard over the course of its short life thanks to the large ice crystals that take shape over the surface. This makes it feel really grainy, and it almost means you need to bite the ice cream instead of licking it, and that's just not nice for anyone involved. Wax paper stops this problem right in its tracks by cutting off any exposure to the air, which means that the crystals don't really ever get the chance to form in the first place. This way, ice cream also doesn't lose any moisture as the wax paper helps to retain it. If you don't ever store your ice cream properly, that is, without any airtight sealing, it goes through something known as freezer burn. That happens when the surface of your ice cream gets dehydrated and gets exposed to just a bit too much air. Think of it like getting a cold, if your ice cream could even get that. Just a bit of wax paper takes care of all this, and for almost no effort too. Freezing in snow is self-explanatory, but there's actually a bit more that goes on there besides what meets the eye and what common sense would tell you up front. People relied on freezing in snow, and yes, preserving food in snow, especially meats and proteins, thanks to the insulation properties and temperature regulation, was a fantastic idea. Just some good old-fashioned human resourcefulness and ingenuity rising to the occasion. Love to see it, right? While there's not a lot to say about the scientific aspect of all of this, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to the cultural aspect. See, this became a community hobby for people that lived in predominantly cold areas, ones with long winters, or people who just lived in rural places and communities away from urban hubs and industrialization. Gathering snow, making snow caves, storing the meat properly, packing it. All of this became a tradition that was spread through families, and it honestly brought people closer together. While I get that just hearing about it in a video might not drive that point home, but if you take a look at how people were living in rural communities before refrigeration, then it's actually sweet. Kids would help out with making pockets in the snow, adults would spend their day cleaning the meat for the community, and it was all just this nice, fair division of responsibility that taught everyone to work, care for food, and gave them some neat skills. I bet you never thought of adding rice to your salt shakers to help keep the salt fresh and make sure it doesn't stick together, but it really does work. See, salt is good at absorbing moisture, but that doesn't mean that neat little property that we've discussed so much throughout this video doesn't come with some serious side effects. Salt ends up clumping together exactly because it's so good at keeping moisture in. And what's good at absorbing moisture from other things? Rice. Rice is amazing at doing this. It can even take it in from the air, so taking away some excess moisture from salt doesn't mean a thing to the tried and tested unit that is rice. As far as grains go, this one really comes in handy in all kinds of ways. Those large chunks of salt are really difficult to break apart any other way, but if you just throw in some rice into your result shaker, you'll find a world of convenience you didn't even know existed, and it was sitting under your nose all along. Smoking fish with wild berries for a natural glaze was one of those strokes of genius that blended necessity and creativity in perfect balance. Freshly caught fish were rubbed or brushed with mashed wild berries like cranberries, chokecherries, or elderberries, then carefully smoked over low, aromatic fires. The natural sugars in the berries caramelized slowly in the smoke, forming a delicate, flavorful glaze that locked in moisture and added a subtle, tangy sweetness to every bite. It was preservation and flavor enhancement rolled into one breathtaking technique. The berry glaze also helped protect the fish from drying out too fast or attracting insects during the long smoking process. But the magic of earthborn cooking did not stop at meat. Deep underground and right in the fire itself, native chefs had another trick: roasting tough, stubborn root vegetables until they were sweet, tender, and full of hidden strength. Using pumpkin shells as nature's crockpots was one of the most visually stunning and practical techniques Native American cooks ever invented. Imagine carving out a big, sturdy pumpkin, filling it with a mixture of meats, roots, grains, and herbs, and setting it carefully near a low, steady fire. The thick pumpkin walls would slowly roast from the outside while the food inside simmered gently, absorbing all the sweet, nutty flavors of the squash itself. The pumpkin became pot, oven, and seasoning all in one, with no waste and no need for heavy metal tools. When the meal was ready, you simply cut into the tender pumpkin itself and ate it alongside the hearty stew it had helped create. It was a way of turning even the simplest gathering into a feast. And if you thought cooking in pumpkins was impressive, just wait until you see how native cooks used nothing but green leaves and open steam to create fish dishes that tasted like a gift straight from the earth itself. So I know for a fact you've never heard about this one before. Animal bladders being used to vacuum pack is definitely the most ancient preservation method I have on this entire list, and this is all thanks to the natural God-gifted sealing ability of the bladder. Basically, the bladder from large animals like pigs, deer, and cows was the one people used the most because of how flexible and elastic it would be. The bladder would be taken out, cleaned, and then opened. You would then tie or stitch it after the food was packed inside, and the key to preserving this was to remove the air from inside the bladder because, again, you don't want those nasty bacteria getting any air they don't deserve. The bladder would even be inflated by people so that people could get a bit more space for the food. Plus, the vacuum effect created thanks to the bladder being removed meant that it was the ideal environment for not spoiling the food. If we talk about history, then people like early explorers and fur traders would rely on bladders for trade and would pass them to nomadic tribes and communities traveling through the areas. It was also very popular in Arctic regions. There are many risks though, and it requires a lot of skill, because if you don't clean it properly, you just risk contamination badly. Have you ever thought to question why people use tin foil when they're baking? It's because it really helps keep the crust from over-baking, or in the worst-case scenario, even burning. Why does it do that though? Well, the foil acts as a barrier to the heat, so it doesn't let all of it get through. This means that not only do you get even cooking thanks to the edges of your pie being closer to the heat source, you also get to ensure it cooks more slowly and at a more even rate. Pies also tend to have their crusts shrink on them, especially when they're filled with fruits and liquid fillings. The aluminum filling helps to make sure those edges stay in shape and don't pull away as the dough starts to cook and expand. It's not just a decorative choice. There are actually loads of reasons to start using tin foil to make sure you get the pie you should be eating. Burying food underground for natural refrigeration was one of the quiet genius moves that let Native American families survive through blistering summers and brutal winters alike. It sounds almost too simple now, but when done right, it was remarkably effective. By digging deep, shaded pits and lining them with grass, bark, or even cool stones, they created natural refrigerators that could keep vegetables crisp, fruits fresh, and even meat safer than leaving it above ground. There was an art to it, a dance with the seasons and the soil that few today remember. But the wisdom of making the earth itself your storage partner never truly faded. And when long journeys or harsh winters loomed ahead, native chefs had another brilliant solution for keeping their people nourished on the move, mixing wild berries, nuts, and hidden energy into one of history's first real trail mixes. Tell us your favorite Betty Crocker trick in the comments, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more classic kitchen secrets.